Okay, everybody, we'll just give everyone a minute or so to get your audio settings set up and log in here, and then we'll begin the program here for First Thursday. See a few more people popping in here. Speaking of popping in, it's almost like when you're microwaving popcorn, and it starts to slow down, you're just waiting to see when those last pops and when you pull it out and get the maximum return on your investment for popcorn popping.
Hey, Joanne.
And the popcorn popper, I think, might have slowed down here. So give it just a few more seconds and then we'll go ahead and get started. See a lot of familiar faces there, which is nice. Good. We got a couple more people that just joined us.
Whatever. Yeah, just a second here.
Just bear with us. I still see some people hopping in here. Good. We're getting a good turnout. Okay, let's do a little sound check here. Can everybody hear me okay? Just you're all on mute, so just wave or yeah, all right. The thumbs up, double thumbs up. That's great. Awesome.
Now, which one? Adjust the audio.
Okay, it is 7:03, and I think we're probably fairly full with our audience here. My name is Joseph Gavednik, the director of the Cowlitz County Historical Museum, and I want to welcome you to another First Thursday program here with the museum. This one is kind of well, they're all special, but this one's special in its own way in that the staff are going to be kind of leading the show here on this one, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in just a moment. But one thing that we used to do with First Thursdays is that you would be able to get a copy of the Cowlitz Historical Quarterly when you came in, and that was sort of a fun thing to get a freebie, and people could fill in their inventory of missing issues that they had. But that hasn't happened since we've been virtual. But because we're virtual and you can come to the museum in person, Danielle came up with a great idea, which is you could get a free copy of a quarterly if you come into the museum and you mention that you were at this First Thursday program. So that way you're not going to get robbed out of getting your complimentary issue of a backstock issue of the quarterly. So thank you, Danielle. That was a great idea.
And the one he has there is on the 1918 Spanish flu. So if you want the 1918 Spanish flu quarterly, there it is.
And then another thing too is we will have our last First Thursday on June 3rd, which will be a Humanities Washington program. Again, we've had a couple of those so far. This will be the last Humanities Washington program that we'll have for this year, called Sometimes Heroes, America's Changing Relationship with Its Veterans, with Jeb Wyman, who is a faculty member at Seattle Central College. And he'll be talking about America's transitioning relationship with its veterans throughout the past century. And so that will kind of lead us off into some veterans-oriented programming that will coincide with the Wall That Heals that we'll be visiting in Longview in late September. And we'll keep you posted with more information on that. The dates that the Wall That Heals will be here, actually, I've got it right here. I've got the flyer or the poster right here. It's September 23rd to September 26th. So we hope you can come and see that. It's about a 3/4 scale model of the Vietnam Veteran Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. Also, for this program, we are going to show 6 short films, and in between them, we're going to have to pop back into this Brady Bunch image of all of us here, and then go back into it in between each one. We weren't able to run them all together. So we won't do questions and answers in between them, in between the films, but we'll do questions and answers at the end. But feel free to enter into the chat box any questions that you have, and we'll go ahead and address those questions at the end of the program. And now, final note here on excuse me. Sorry about that. Forgot to mute the phone. Final note here, the cemetery tour we've done here in Cowlitz County for a couple of years now, and we did it in partnership with the Stella Historical Society and with the Bunker Hill Cemetery Association. And these were live events with an audience that would come on site to a cemetery, and they would be led in groups by docents that would go to the grave site of a historical person, and then there would be a living history actor there dressed up in period attire, and they would talk about that person's life for about 5 minutes as a monologue. And then the audience would then move to the next one and then to the next one. Well, with last year's COVID-19 experience, we obviously weren't able to do that. So we thought we would do a virtual tour. And what that has done actually is it's allowed us to do highlights of people buried at different cemeteries that are not all in one location. And so that's one of the advantages we have to the virtual program. And then what we also did was we changed it up where you're not going to see somebody necessarily talking at a gravesite for 5 minutes. You're going to actually see what's in a sense going to be almost like a Ken Burns style film with a narrative by the staff person, and then you'll see the some live footage too mixed into it with some of the film. So we hope you really enjoy it. And Bill was having a lot of fun playing with this new technology that we have that he was trained on through the historical Cowlitz County Historical Preservation Commission. And so he may address a little bit about that experience as far as piecing everything together. And so I think that might be enough for the announcements. Danielle or Jim or Bill, actually, do you have any final words before we go ahead? And we'll just go ahead and launch this. These are all profiles of people who died during the 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic and that are buried here in Cowlitz County. And we're going to start with the person who passed away first, and then it'll progression chronologically to the person who passed away last. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, who will go ahead and walk us through the first short film. There's going to be 6 short films.
Hello, my name is Fern Maynard Master. I was born November 30th, 1891, right here in Kelso, to Elmer J. Master and Mary Fern Master. Fern was my mother's maiden name. They were both from Western Pennsylvania and came out here in early 1891 right after they got married. A lot of their friends and neighbors had come out here in the previous couple years to work in the Collins lumber camp up at Ostrander. Pa decided he'd rather work in a mill here in town rather than be up in the woods away from me and Ma. He bought us a house in town at 4th and Vine Streets. Later on, when the city began to put addresses on things, the house was 314 Vine Street. I don't remember the big flood of 1894, as I was only 2 1/2, but the high water left marks a couple feet high in the house. My folks would tell stories about going to the grocery in a boat, how they had to move what furniture they could up to the little room upstairs, and trying to clean up all the mess afterwards. Apparently all of South Kelso was several feet underwater from the backed up Cowlitz and Coweeman rivers. In '03, Pa decided that he'd had enough mill work and went in as a partner in a grocery store. It was on Ash Street, a block and a half away from the railroad depot. It was a typical neighborhood grocery, but we did some good business, with railroad passengers coming over from the depot. After a couple years, Pa's partner, J.S. Robb, left to start a saloon, so the store became E. Master and Son. In addition to clerking, I also did the bookkeeping. My responsibilities at the store pretty much ended my formal education at the 8th grade. I also liked going to the local theaters to see traveling shows. The Kelso Theater and the Vogue Theater were great for live shows, but the Edison Theater had the better moving picture equipment and musicians. In late 1916, a pair of sisters, Laura and Mary Gatton, moved to Kelso from Portland to join the ensemble playing for movies at the Edison. I soon became sweet on Laura and started calling on her regularly. A little more than a month after America joined the Great War, in May of 1917, Laura and I, and Mary and her boyfriend Art, decided to take a pleasure trip up to British Columbia in my car. Or so we told our friends. Instead of going all the way there, though, we stopped in Chehalis, found a Presbyterian minister, and had ourselves a nice little double ceremony. Boy, were our friends surprised on our return. It was only 2 weeks later that I had to register for the draft. Tuesday, June 5th, 1917, was conscription day nationwide, where all men aged 21 to 30 were supposed to register with their local examination board. Nearly 1,000 of us were registered in Cowlitz County. We were then each assigned a number, which would correspond to a random number drawing, which they did back in D.C. They told all of us we would eventually be called, and that this draft number system would just establish the order in which we were called. I found out that my number was 405th of the Cowlitz County men. At first, they only called up the first 120 men for examination. They expected a lot of exemptions. Common exemptions were not being physically fit, having dependent children, or working an essential job. Married men without children were refused exemption on those grounds alone. If you were called and failed to show up for the exam board, you were automatically enlisted, and then the sheriff would find you and put you on a train direct to the big camp at American Lake. Waiting to be called up turned to worrying when I read the front page story of the Kelsonian on May 25th, 1918. It said that starting July 1st, all draft-age men must either work in an essential occupation or fight. This order was primarily aimed at gamblers, layabouts, day laborers, but the list also included store clerks. My job. I would have to go into the Army. Then, a week later, a glimmer of hope. There was a call for special service volunteers. These men would get training for specialized home front or behind-the-lines jobs. Me and Laura talked it over and decided that this would be my best chance to avoid combat. On Saturday, June 8th, 1918, I presented myself to the examination board in Kalama and volunteered for the mechanical training school in Pullman. I left on July 14th for the 3-month training. When I got there, they had more need for radio operators than mechanics, so they shifted me to the Army radio training. I found I had a natural aptitude for it, and I finished the 3-month training in about 1 month. In August, they transferred me to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I was commissioned a sergeant in the Army Signal Corps. The encampment was massive. Tent cities sprawled for miles around the fort. Many Army units formed from the Midwest were there for basic training, but there were also a lot of units, like mine, that were there from all over the West and were there to get specialized training. If a soldier had to leave his unit, he might get lost trying to find his way back. It was such a beehive. 2 months after I got there, in October, this strange sickness started going around. In a big camp like that, you couldn't really stop it from spreading. I managed to avoid it until the end of the month, when it grabbed onto me and laid me low. The doctors called it pneumonia because it was attacking my lungs. It was really an early variation of the Spanish flu. It killed me on October 26, 1918. I was the first member of my battalion to die, so they gave me a military funeral there, and the entire battalion escorted my body to the train taking my body to Kelso. I was buried here with a graveside service on November 1st, 1918, just 10 days before the armistice.
That was our first one there, and I just think Bill did a fantastic job editing, choosing the sounds. I mean, I was just blown away when I saw what he had done with it. This has been a really fun project. On a little note, there's this part where Fern is tapping away on a piece of equipment. That's actually an outboard motor that I was able to find in my garage. And I was trying to find an old wrench to work on it, but I couldn't. So I used a ball peen hammer and I was tapping on it with a screwdriver because I was trying to use materials that wouldn't give it away. I didn't want to have a craftsman wrench there working on it. So that's a little tidbit. And that some of that footage was shot up north outside of Olympia. Danielle, you're on mute. I think you were saying something.
And with that, we'll go on to the next one.
Okay.
Do you have anything else to say?
And with that, we'll go on to the next one.
Okay, sounds good.
I had a little bird and its name was Enza. I opened up the window and influenza. That's a little nursery rhyme my classmates at the Catlin School started using in October before the schools were closed down. Hi, my name is Vern. If I'm in trouble, it's Gerald Verney P. I'm 11. My dad is Thomas Benton P. And Mama was Mary Elizabeth Jennings before she got married. She was married before Pa, so I have an older half-brother, Ralph. I also have a younger brother, Loyal. He's only 4. I go to the Catlin School, which means I have to walk across the bridge each day to get there from our house on 7th Street. Sometimes it's a little scary when the wood is wet and slippery and the cables groan and shift as a car or horse cart goes slowly past me. I like the 5th grade so far. Catlin has 4 classrooms, one for the 1st and 2nd graders, one for the 3rd and 4th graders, one for the 5th and 6th graders, and one for the 7th and 8th graders. I also like going to church on Sundays too. We go to the Christian church on 2nd. It's not that far to walk from our house. The state health department closed all the schools down in late October. The theaters too. About a week later, I got really sick. The fever and chills were terrible. I barely wanted to move. A week after that, I heard shouting and celebrating outside. Ralph came in and told me the Great War was over, the fighting had stopped, and they were going to reopen the schools on Monday. I missed my friends and wanted to go, but all I could do was lay there. Just as well, the schools were only back open for a day before the county health officer closed them again. Too many other kids sick, and teachers too. The next week, I got so bad that my parents took me down to a hospital in Portland. I couldn't move at all by this time. I heard the doctors call it motor paralysis. and then they started saying heart congestion. I could hear Mama crying next to me as I drifted off to sleep one last time on the morning of December 11th, 1918. They brought me home and buried me here, next to Grandma P, who had died when I was 4.
Bill, would you like to say a few words on that one?
Yes, that script was originally written for my stepson, but he didn't want to do the voice. So we got another boy to do the voice, but he was fine doing the acting. So that's why there's 2 names for as on that one. It was still pretty fun. I may have fudged a few little facts on that when I wrote the script for it, because if he lived up on 7th, he would have gone to the Washington school, not Catlin. But I was trying to make it, like I said, when I wrote the script, it was for my stepson who lives up there and goes to Catlin. So that's why I wrote it like that.
I also want to make a comment too that the boy who did do the voiceover was Parker Ebel, who is up in the Lacey area, and we asked him kind of on pretty short notice to do the voiceover, and he really stepped up to the plate. And
he did a fantastic job.
And his father and him are here too, that could probably contribute to some of the conversation after the program is over.
And if that's all, I'll go ahead and start the next one.
Okay.
Hello, my name is James Roger Catlin. Most people call me Jim. I was born February 6, 1876, the first child of Adam and Mary Jane Galloway Catlin on the family homestead north of Freeport, Washington Territory. Both of my parents were children of pioneers. My father's family came west from Illinois in 1848 and to the Cowlitz River in 1850. My mother's family came west from Indiana in the early 1850s, later taking over the Hayes donation land claim on the west bank of the Cowlitz. My father ran a store in Freeport with his older brother Fred. They also did some lumber milling. The Catlin boys, following the example of Grandpa Seth, were shrewd businessmen and managed to make quite a bit of money from their investments. Grandpa Seth had passed on 11 years before I was born, so Grandma Agnes was living with us until her death in 1885. She would regale me and my younger brothers with tales of her youth in Scotland and of crossing the continent in wagons to the Oregon country with a large family in tow. She also impressed upon me the importance of being a good Christian. She introduced me to the Presbyterian faith, to which I would become devoted for the rest of my life, eventually becoming an elder in the Kelso Presbyterian Church. The year Grandma Agnes died, my father built a new home for our growing family. By then, I had been joined by my younger brothers Charles in 1880 and Ernest in 1884. Little sister Mary would come along in 1890. By then, Dad had started his own town. He tried to call it Marysville after Mom, but that name was already taken in Washington, so he just called his town Catlin. Freeport had ceased operating as a town several years before, so Catlin became the place to conduct business on the west side of the Cowlitz River. In 1903, I fell in love with Miss Clara Hansicke, and we were married that October, moving into our own place on a west side farm. We would have 4 children together: Josephine in 1904, James in 1907, Lucille in 1909, and Margaret in 1915. In 1907, my father died. A year later, the town he had platted was incorporated into Kelso, and the name Catlin disappeared off the map for a while, as it came to be called West Kelso afterwards. From my farm on the west side, I began to see the value of reclaiming low, swampy areas for agricultural use through diking. I helped start and become one of the first commissioners for Cowlitz County Diking District No. 1. Other diking districts soon formed, following our example. It was also around this time, in 1912, that I became the vice president of the Kelso State Bank. Having such a hand in Kelso business interests brought out a sense of civic responsibility in me, and so that fall I decided to seek office in the state legislature. I campaigned on a moral legislation platform with a special emphasis on the dry campaign, sometimes called prohibition. I won a seat as a representative for Cowlitz County and went on to serve 2 terms at the 1913 and 1915 sessions. Even though I lost my re-election bid in 1916, I continued to serve the community as best I could. We were in the midst of home front efforts for the Great War when the Spanish influenza began to hit our area in mid-October 1918. Schools, churches, and other public gatherings were closed by order of the state health officer. But after 3 weeks, the armistice took effect in Europe, and the public jubilation led to people wanting to get back to normal. County schools were reopened the following Monday, and reclosed on Tuesday by order of the county health officer. After that, the newspapers were reporting several deaths a week, either directly from the flu or from pneumonia that set in with or after the flu. I began to feel it about December 6th. I was quickly bedridden at home with the flu. My strength was sapped, and the pain in my head from the fever was excruciating. It soon settled in my lungs. Pneumonia had taken hold too. I died on December 13th, 1918, at the age of 42. My death could have been prevented. If my family had taken me to Dr. Davis's hospital in Kelso at the outset, I would have recovered. Not a one of his influenza hospital patients succumbed to the disease. My funeral was well attended, despite the flu still rampant in the community, and I was buried here in Kelso's Oddfellows Cemetery. The Catlin legacy begun by my grandfather in West Kelso lives on, with now a street and a school named after the family and the town started by my father.
Fun fact there, James Catlin was actually one of the first people I identified in the Cowlitz Memorial Gardens Cemetery when I thought about branching out our cemetery tour into other county cemeteries 3 or 4 years ago. So he's one of the first people I identified up there to research for a cemetery tour.
And we'll go ahead and do the next one, played by your lovely wife.
Hello, my name is Hazel Beck. I was born Hazel Emeretta Hunt on May 19th, 1894 in Cairo, Michigan, the only child of Aylmer L. Hunt and Eliza R. Klinger Hunt. When I was young, we moved south to the big city of Detroit, where my father was his traveling salesman. He became a grocer when that job didn't pan out. When I was 9, he started getting sick. His stomach hurt a lot, and the doctors tried to tell him that it was just ulcers. But when I was 10, he died of stomach cancer. We took his body back to Cairo for burial, because that's where Grandma and Grandpa Hunt lived. After that, Mother took us down to Ohio, just across the Michigan state line. There she met and married another man named Hunt, Herbert H., who was no relation to Father, by the way. He was a baker from Ontario, Canada, and he liked to be called Bert. I think Mother liked the idea of not having to change her name again. Soon afterwards, we moved out west. We bought a house in the town of Kelso at 601 South 3rd Street. I started school there, but I didn't really enjoy the long walk up the hill to the schoolhouse, especially during the winters when the streets were so muddy. At least I made some good friends. Some of the things I remember about that time were my first smelt run and when the bridge to Catlin washed out. It was January 1906 when I saw my first smelt run. My friends told me all about it, but it was hard to believe, so they walked me over to the railroad depot to watch. Looking out over the Cowlitz River, underwater, I could see a large, writhing mass snaking its way upriver and above dozens of small boats, each with 1 or 2 men in them dipping their long-handled nets into the mass. In smooth, practiced motions, the men pulled up a net of small, shiny little fish, dumping them out at the bottom of the boat, then plunged right in for more. At the docks, just upriver of us, several boats that were already full were tied up to have their catch boxed up for shipping. Each boat must have had about several hundred pounds in it. Already the boxes were piling up at the depot, waiting to be shipped by train. It was quite the spectacle for a girl who had only seen Great Lakes fishermen ply their trade before. It was November of that year, 1906, when a large storm and high water washed out the bridge over to Catlin. The bridge was only 2 years old, a wooden and cable bridge with a drawspan to allow the stern wheelers to pass. It was a private toll bridge, but it was quicker and easier than waiting for a ferry to cross the river. The same storm caused a lot more damage upriver, but the bridge was the big loss for Kelso. The owners rebuilt the bridge the next year, and it was a bit sturdier. As I started making friends, so did my stepfather Bert. In 1909, he and some of his friends decided to try their hand at farming down in southern Oregon, in Douglas County. So our family, with Amos Bucher, Charlie Brack, and Oliver Knowles, left Kelso together and bought farms near each other on the South Umpqua River near the village of Purdue, just southeast of Roseburg. By then, I'd had enough of schooling and didn't bother attending the small rural school at Purdue. Instead, I settled into helping out my parents on their new farm. Other than our neighbors, we occasionally had the company of travelers along the river road. That was how I met my first husband. Claude H. Short was a handsome enough young man, only a few years older than me. His family lived in Roseburg, but he'd bought a farm in the hills farther up the South Umpqua between the villages of Tiller and Drew. Our courtship went well, and after I turned 18, we were married in November of 1912. I moved to his mountain ranch with him. 11 months later, thankfully in Roseburg with a doctor present, I gave birth to our daughter, Mabel Bernice Short. Life was hard on the ranch, especially with a small child. Claude didn't make it any easier. It seemed like he was always yelling at me all the time. Instead of hiring help, he made me do a lot of the hard labor on the ranch. Things didn't get any easier when, in 1914, my parents gave up their farm and moved back to Kelso. After that, my only solace seemed to be spending time with Claude's mother and sister in Roseburg. By 1917, Claude and I had grown to hate each other. He left in September, so I sued for divorce and custody of our daughter. He was no fit parent. A Douglas court was swift to grant both conditions. Bernice and I caught the next train north for Kelso to live with my parents. It was nice to see old friends again. It was also nice to see how the town had improved in the 8 years I'd been gone. I'd heard there was some stigma of being a divorced woman, but I didn't experience it. So I was so glad to be rid of Claude that I did not care. I made myself useful by helping out in Bert's bakery. A few months later, I met a sweet older man who became sweet on me. His name was William Beck, and he was a watchmaker who had a jewelry shop in town. He was born in Pennsylvania, but had been in Cowlitz County for 25 years since his family had come west to work at the Collins logging operation at Ostrander. Even though he was nearly 20 years older than me, his kindly disposition matched my own, and he was ready to settle down and raise a family. It didn't hurt that my parents liked him too. We were married in Vancouver on June 16th, 1918, and after a short honeymoon up in Seattle, we rented a house at 303 Cowlitz Way. Helping him out in his watch shop was much nicer than being in the bakery. Not nearly as hot, and the hours were much better. We had lots of fun together, despite the restrictions put on us by the Great War. In October, a nasty new form of influenza arrived in the town. Some people got sick, but a few people died. Even though public meetings were closed down and we had to wear masks, it didn't seem so bad. We tried to carry on with business as usual. We celebrated with the rest of the town when the armistice was signed in November. The flu was getting worse in December, and most families had at least one or two people sick at home over the winter. The Christmas season was busy at the shop, and I think that's how I caught it. It was the day after Christmas that it started to hit me. The fever and chills, the horrible achiness. It was dreadful. After the first day, I was stuck in bed. A few days later, it turned into pneumonia. I heard the church bells ringing in the new year, but our family had nothing to celebrate. I died about 10:30 in the morning on January 4th, 1919. A small private funeral was held at my parents' house 3 days later, mostly because of the ban on public gatherings. Out of respect for me, all of the businesses in Kelso closed during my funeral. Afterwards, my body was sent to Portland for cremation. William was so heartbroken that he could barely carry on. He couldn't even look at my daughter without being reminded of his grief. My parents ended up raising her. William ended up losing his jewelry business and turned to odd jobs until he took up farming in Hazeldale. We were finally rejoined in 1962.
Nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah. Oh, nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows the Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah.
Bill, did you have anything to say for Maggie's?
It was another fun one to put together.
How much did Maggie enjoy dressing up?
She loves dressing up, so that was not the issue. The issue was getting her to record it in the first place. She was the last one to record, but she did a good job, so I'm proud of her.
And for everybody, Maggie is our resident vintage wardrobe expert. And so we often draw on her expertise, and we'll say, hey, Bill, can you get Maggie over here? We have a question. And she helped us out actually with our women's suffrage exhibit, where we had some mannequins that had some vintage 1920s attire, and helped get them dressed up and model them.
I'll go ahead and show the next one.
Hello, my name is Mrs. George Schultz. Mary to my friends.
I was born June 15th, 1881, in Nova Scotia, Canada, the first child of Philip MacDonald and Margaret Mackenzie MacDonald. Yes, all my grandparents were Scottish, but my parents had been born in Nova Scotia. 2 sisters and then 2 brothers came after me. Father was a carpenter in the Victoria district. He had some distant cousins, others the clan MacDonald, who had settled in southwest Washington state in America, and he dreamed of doing the same. So Father went to purchase a tract of land to settle on, and we immigrated to America a few years later in 1892 when I was 11. We took the train out west. The homestead was on the north side of a beautiful lake called Toutle Lake, about halfway between the post offices of Silver Lake and Sightly. It was 80 acres and very fertile, being so close to the lake and having been cleared off by the previous owner. I finished school in the 8th grade and then spent my time helping around the farm. It was at a social dance at the schoolhouse that I met my future husband. George Schultz was a timber faller from Wisconsin who'd been working for Mr. Barnes of the Barnes and Bull lumber mill near the schoolhouse. Even though George was 15 years older than me, he was sweet, and he had a great mustache. We got married at my parents' house on October 16th, 1901. We rented a house in Castle Rock, and George went to work for one of the mills there. 11 months later, our first child, Mildred, was born. Barely more than a year after that, our second daughter, Eunice, came along, named after a sister of George's. Much of the time I was alone with the girls, while George was out in the woods cutting bolts for the shingle mills. In early April 1905, I got word that my younger brother Roy had been killed in a logging accident. He was only 17. In 1906, George went back to working for Mr. Barnes, whose company was now called the Silver Lake Railroad and Timber Company. We've moved back up to the lake, this time just to the east, in the Sightly area. I'm glad we moved back up there with all the things that happened that winter. There was a terrible storm in November after a cold spell when the mountain had lots of snow. In just 2 days, the Cowlitz River rose 14 feet. I saw the devastation to Castle Rock afterwards and wept for the town's loss. In late December, when everyone in town was still recovering and trying to piece together a Merry Christmas, Father started to get sick. It seemed like trouble with his heart. He died a week later on January 2nd, 1907. We buried him next to Roy at the Silver Lake Cemetery. Within a year and a half, both my sisters had run off and got married, leaving Mother with only my youngest brother, Daniel, to help on their farm. Life went on. In November 1910, I gave birth to our first son, Calvin. A year and a half later, I had Jason, our second boy. The older girls were good with them and were a great help to me. Mother died in 1915, leaving the farm to 20-year-old Daniel. 2 years later, my last child came along, a daughter, and I named her Margaret after Mother. By then, we'd moved to a place on the west side of the Cowlitz, above Castle Rock, while George worked out in the woods. The children could walk to school over the new steel bridge, and it was also a short ride to the Methodist Church on Sundays. When the United States joined the Great War, George was thankfully too old for the draft. That and his job as a woodsman kept him out of military service, as they were considered essential to the war effort. It was terrible to hear that some of our local boys died in service. The first one we heard about was Harlan Merrill, who was killed by some new form of influenza up at Fort Worden. It was after the armistice in November that we got reports of death in combat or from wounds received. George Eaton and Albert Rosen from up the Toutle, and Dick Sugars, Elmer Leonard, and Scott Chisholm from in town. In December, the same influenza that killed poor young Mr. Merrill began to spread around town, despite there being a mask order on and a limit to public gatherings. It struck our family about 2 weeks into the new year. I was stuck in bed, and so was Eunice. Through my ragged breath, I implored George to keep the children safe. I died on January 17th, 1919, at the age of 37. They laid me to rest in the Whittle Cemetery. George tried with the children, he really did, but most of them would join me all too soon. Eunice died just a month after me at the hospital in Chehalis. Poor little Margaret, who I'd barely gotten to know before I passed, died herself in 1929 when she was only 12. Jason followed a year later from a car accident. He was only 18. 2 years after Calvin died, George finally joined me in 1945. He had never remarried.
So that was mine, which was a lot of fun to do. The hardest part for mine was that mine was actually the longest script that Bill put together. It was longer than Joseph's by what, like 5 words? So it's the longest script, which made it way too long to share it all. So the hardest part was actually like shortening it down and taking parts out. Like there was a whole description of the flood that happened to Castle Rock, and I loved every bit of it, and I had to drop it all. I was so sad. So the other disappointing thing on that one was I really wanted to play dress up, but it never quite worked out for me to play dress up and go to the cemetery tour. So darn. And with that, one last video to go. So I'll go ahead and start that one.
Hello, my name is Alfred Wilton Wright. Sometimes I've gone by Albert instead, or even A.W. I was born June 28, 1839 to James and Polly Rolfe Wright in Ohio, one of their 13 children. My youth is a bit murky after all these years, so some of my facts may be a little off. After completing my common education, I began studying medicine, but then the Civil War broke out and I left to serve my country. I enlisted in Company H of the 3rd Kentucky Infantry at Camp Dick Robinson in central Kentucky. We were attached to the Army of the Ohio, and in the early months of 1862 began the campaign into eastern Tennessee. We were there at Shiloh and the siege of Corinth, Mississippi, before turning back toward home to pursue the Rebs' campaign into Kentucky. We stopped them at Perryville, the biggest battle to take place in Kentucky. That was where I got my only wound of the war, this little crease over my right eye. We took part in many more battles following Johnny Reb all over Tennessee. We fought at Stones River, Chickamauga, and in the Chattanooga campaign. After some occupation duty, we went with Sherman in the March on Atlanta and helped destroy a lot of railroad in the surrounding area. After the Battle of Jonesboro, Georgia, we were moved back to Nashville. There, I was transferred to Battery A of the 1st Kentucky Light Artillery, with which I would serve throughout Tennessee for the rest of the war. After my discharge in June of 1865, I headed back home and back to medical school at the University of Cincinnati. After graduating, I practiced in southern Ohio for a time and even married a sweet little gal there. But after she died in 1871, my heart broken, I had to get out of there. I ended up in San Francisco, California. For a time, I tried to continue my medical practice, but it became hard to keep up with changes in the profession, and the competition was fierce in San Francisco. I decided instead to become an orchardist, taking care of fruit and nut trees. It was a job in high demand in the area and much less stressful than medicine. I mostly stayed at boarding houses, and it's lucky for me that I did. When I moved into 543 Mina Street, I met a charming widowed dressmaker named Sally Wallace Brooks. Her husband had died in 1872, around the same time as my wife, and she had 3 children that were being raised up by her brother's family in Washington Territory. We hit it off and decided to get married in May of 1888. It was in courting Sally that I'm afraid I told a little white lie that I was so ashamed of I had to take it to my grave. I told her I had been a captain in the late War of the Rebellion, when in fact the highest rank I ever earned was that of sergeant. It was this lie that kept me from filing for government pension, although I still joined the Grand Army of the Republic, a national club for Union veterans. We lived and worked happily in San Francisco, occasionally traveling up to Kelso, now in Washington State, to visit Sally's family. We were not up there, however, when Sally's parents died, Victor Wallace in 1895, and a year later, Isabel. And those were some painful telegrams that Sally received from her brothers. Then, in the early morning of April 18, 1906, our world was rent asunder. A massive shaking threw us from our bed and threatened to tear the whole building down. When the ground stopped moving, we grabbed some of our belongings and made our way outside, all the while looking around in stunned disbelief at the destruction this earthquake had wrought. Within hours, fires started by the quake had grown too large to manage, and by the next day our home was nothing but ash. Taking with us the few things we had managed to salvage, we boarded a boat headed north. We were taken in by Sally's family in Kelso, at first by her brother James, and then eventually with Sally's daughter Rose and her husband Scott Strain. Scott was a partner in one of the big general stores in Kelso, and they did a booming business. He also helped start the First National Bank of Kelso in 1907 and was its first president. He made a good bit of money and was a popular local figure, but the stress on him was heavy, and his health began to fail. He died in September 1908, leaving a mourning community and my poor daughter-in-law, Rose, with 3 children to raise. Nearly a year later, in August of 1909, we lost Sally. She was 67 and the better part of me. I maintained a wide circle of friends in Kelso, always eager to help out with a kind deed or a word, always ready to swap stories of the old days. I began to spend winters in California as I could get around better in the drier climate. When Rose decided to move her family up to Seattle in 1918, I went with them, and I decided to try Florida that autumn instead of California this time. And wouldn't you know it, that doggone influenza caught me there. It laid me low for a little while, but by early December I was better enough to travel. So I boarded a train back to the Pacific coast, headed for the only family I had left. Despite my illness, I was delighted to be on a train filled with its soldiers returning home from the Great War. Their energy and camaraderie raised the spirits of this poor old soldier. Once back in Seattle, my health continued to spiral down. It finally failed me on March 2nd, 1919. Under my instructions, I was taken down to Kelso to be laid to rest there, next to my dear Sally in the Oddfellows Cemetery.
Okay, that's our final short film, and we can open it up. I see there's a few comments. Danielle might chime in too as she sees comments. And yeah, the sheriff hoisting the pint, David Olson commented about that. And something I've learned relatively recently is that the sheriff's office was a difficult one to hold in the later part of the 1800s. It seems like we had actually quite a few sheriffs that would come and go rather frequently. It was not as prestigious of a position back then, apparently. Any other comments? Or Jim, would you like to comment just briefly about your experience with the voicing it over and your thoughts on the process?
Sure. The when I got the script, I was unfamiliar with Alfred completely, but the thing that caught my eye was during the Civil War, he was at Corinth, Mississippi, where 2 generations, that's 3 and 4 generations back on my family, are buried there, and have quite a bit of family still in that area. That was kind of interesting. And plus, then when Bill walked me out to do my little on-camera thing, turns out that Alfred is buried, I don't know, 25, 30 feet below where our family graves are in Kelso, which is sort of strange. So I offered to do a video on camera disappearing act over my own gravesite, but we thought that was probably bad taste, and I did. That's all it was fun to do.
Everyone should be able to unmute themselves now if they have any questions. So go ahead and unmute yourselves for answers. Yeah, one thing about mine, why I chose mine is I was 37 when I chose my character, and my character was 37 when she passed, and felt a bit of a connection there.
Yeah, same with mine. I'm the same age as the person I portrayed. So,
how did you find out that Captain Wright really was never a captain?
That was well, I started writing his script, and then I almost had to abandon him because his early years were just about blank. That's why I included the bit about early years being murky in there. There were so many rights in the Civil War that I had a really hard time finding him. And since he never filed for a pension, I could not find any pension on him. I couldn't figure out what unit he was with. And I finally narrowed it down to just a couple units, and ended up going with the Kentucky one. But yeah, no record of him being a captain at all. Just the highest rank sergeant. I have no idea where the captain came from.
I think he was in love, Bill.
I have a question for the ones who had scripts to read. Obviously, there's nothing new under the sun because we're going through another pandemic right now. And I can really identify some of what they went through. But these stories are the pathos of these stories. I find myself really wondering, leaving so many children without their mother, leaving families that had to ship children off, children that died so soon and are so young in life. But how did the ones who had to read these scripts and be portrayed, how did you feel when you were reading these stories? I always like to know how did that resonate with you?
Well, as I said, I'll start with that because we were all reading off the scripts. Bill did some amazing work putting them together, and then we kind of chose, and I chose mine because I identified most with her, and there were a few other things that we had in common. And it was kind of scary. Like, I see so much myself in this woman who then gets sick and dies at the end. And by the end of my story, actually, at the end of my script, I went back and read the script and went, head count, who's actually still alive at the end of my script? And it's one daughter. One daughter was the only one at the end of her story, which was a really powerful moment for me when I realized she had the one son lived long enough to have children. So she had grandchildren from 2 lines, barely, out of 6 and or out of 5 kids. So that's sort of like I was, but her early life was really kind of like fun train rides and things like that. So when I was reading, especially when I got to that end point, and I was thinking about reading about like the family passing, I was thinking, as a mother, if I was a mother, it wouldn't be like my death that would be the part that would be hitting me the hardest. It'd be my kids' deaths. So I try to really emphasize and put the stress in my voice there when I was talking about when the kids died, I don't have kids, but I love working with kids. So for me, that was like, I really wanted to put the emphasis where I thought that her emphasis would be. So, and try to put like pride wherever, like there were parts in there where like it just kind of felt like she'd be proud that she was married George Schultz and things like that.
And I'd like to add one more bit. And David Olson, I saw that you raised your hand. You wanted to say something too, and we'll get to you in just a moment. But adding on to what my mother Margaret had mentioned about how did it feel about reading these sad stories about the loss of children or children losing parents. I also wondered about one of the profiles was for a child who died, and Bill's stepson portrayed a role in an acting role there that was videoed, and then Parker Ebel read the script from it. And so I was wondering if either Bill, you have any things that you noticed from Miles's portrayal, or Eric, and if Parker is there, if there's any commentary there on what that experience was like reading the story of a young person who succumbed to this.
Well, Miles didn't really read the script. He wasn't all that interested in reading it. So when I was taking pictures of him at the cemetery, I just gave him acting directions like, okay, he's died, and he had motor paralysis, so play it stiff, and he was okay with that. If Parker's on, he can give us his impression.
Hi, my name is Parker Evil, and I played Vern P. It felt kind of nice playing a fifth grader, going to a school with only 4 classrooms, and that it just felt kind of interesting that the schools were only open for a day and then they closed because a lot of people were sick, and so that just made me feel like why did they even bother opening the schools? So that just was really interesting to me.
Thanks. I feel like that too sometimes with the museum. We'd open and then the governor shuts us down, and then we're kind of back and forth. Thanks a lot, Parker. And then David, thanks for being patient, and you're on next.
Oh yeah. Actually, Dale had a question, but before her question, could you remind me which cemetery in Kelso are all the stones in one cemetery, and where is that located?
Let's see. One person was cremated, so they're not in any cemetery, and 4 out of the other 5 are in the Cowlitz View Memorial Gardens Cemetery, which back then, at the time of the Spanish flu, was the Oddfellows Cemetery. And the other person is up in Castle Rock at the Whittle Hubbard Cemetery.
Thanks. Then Dale had a question.
And my question is for you, Bill. How much artistic license did you use in writing the scripts and the biographies for these people? Because obviously you can't know everything about the details of their life. And the reason I ask that is because I've been researching some of the people buried at our Kath Lammett Pioneer Cemetery, and in writing their profiles, I've had to kind of make my best guess about some aspects of their life. So how did you work with that?
I basically made a list of known facts, everything I could find from obituaries, other newspaper articles about them, census records, military records, anything like that, and made that list, and then just kind of tried to fill in the blanks around that. So some of them have a lot more artistic license than others. The one for James Catlin was pretty well factual. Others, like as I mentioned between the videos, the one for Vern P, I did take a bit of artistic license with that, and also a little bit with Jim's, the Captain Wright one, just because there was some murkiness about his military record. But yeah, I think it varied, the artistic license, between about 10% and 50%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also took a little artistic license with the photos I chose. Some of them were not the actual person, but were more representative, like the early pictures for Captain Wright. That was not him as a Civil War soldier. That was not his marriage photo. It was just an early photo that we had in the collection of a Civil War soldier and a young couple in the 1870s. So there was also some artistic license in the photo choice.
You did a wonderful job.
Yeah, great job. Thank you.
I know I helped Bill find some of the pictures for mine, and the baby, the first daughter, is a girl, but the baby picture we showed is actually a little boy. Best I could find.
To that question, or to that subject, I was curious, Bill and the rest of the staff, how far, how many other sources besides what's in our collection did you have to go to in order to get the comprehensive information you had about all 6 people? Because I'm not aware that we have all of that kind of information on all of those individuals, or do we?
The ones who spent most of the time here, like James Catlin, I didn't have to go anywhere else but the museum, because we had everything here, especially the newspapers. The ones who came from elsewhere, I used a lot of Ancestry.com and newspapers.com. Those were especially important in putting together the Hazel Beck, the one my wife portrayed, because of her time in Southern Oregon. I had to get a lot of information from the Roseburg newspaper. In fact, that's one of the headlines I used in her story. So Ancestry.com and findagrave.com were very important for several of these.
I want to commend the whole staff for putting this together. I think it was a wonderful, amazing job. I hope that, you know, I think even though that we've done this virtually, I think it could be redone as a first Thursday program down the line. I wouldn't mind seeing it again, and then we could even get a bigger audience. And I don't know, on KLTV or something. I just thank the whole staff very much for all the time and effort and research that you put into that. It was interesting evening.
Yeah.
Most of the
Joseph,
credit.
I think Danielle and I are going to
most
say
of
the
the
same
credit
thing.
goes to Bill.
Yeah, it all goes to Bill. Bill did like 95, 98% of it here. It all really is, it's all Bill. He authored everything. He did all the research. He looked through all of our collections for the images and the sound dubbing and piecing it all together. All we did was read off a script that he handed us, and had to whittle some of them down because they were a little longer, but that was it. And I had fun dressing up and playing the role a little bit. That's it. It's all Bill. I mean, this is he did a fantastic job. I keep calling him Ken Burns around here because of what he's done, and we're really thankful to have his enthusiasm and this training that he had to do these video productions. So I think we can definitely, Karen, do more of these. I don't think Bill would complain too much. I shouldn't speak for him, but he seemed to he had a smile on his face every time I went in there while he was editing. And one quick thing too, I just wanted to address some comments in the chat area too, because we've had some people raising their hands, but I know Sandy noticed that Captain Sergeant Wright was born in 1933 with a question mark, and I think we must have done an error on that. I'm imagining that would be 1833.
Yeah, 1833.
and so there may have been a misquote there or something. But yeah, and there's a comment also about eye-opening how influenza epidemic resembles our own times. And you'll see that if you get this copy of the historical quarterly, there's a lot of parallels. And also on the Cowlitz County Museum website, you can click on a link that'll get you to a PDF of this as well.
Now, Joseph, do we plan on putting these videos on our website?
Yes, we do. We will eventually have them on our website. This is actually being recorded also, and we will load these. We're doing some final tweaks with our website right now for the Historical Society website, and then we'll have those linked along with some videos that Danielle had already shot for education purposes that involve some of the exhibits in the museum. So yes, we will have them available. Also, there was a comment here also, in what cemetery were the first two tombstones located? And I was the first one, and that was in the Catlin View, Cowlitz View Memorial Garden.
Both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them up there. It's the one just off the beginning of Mount Brinion Road if you go up North 7th in Kelso, and at the end of it, it turns to go over the highway onto Mount Brinion Road. It's just past Minor Road right there.
Joseph, a question. I know that you put out a request for comments and experiences with what is happening in the current pandemic. Have you received much response from that to know what people are experiencing currently?
We've received not as much as I would have liked to have received. So if anybody could get onto the Cowlitz County Museum website, and there's a link also for that survey. And if you click on it, you can just fill it out online and it'll automatically email it to me. But we've got maybe 30 or so responses on that. And we relaunched that in partnership with the Cowlitz County Historic Preservation Commission just recently. And we got a few more that trickled in, but considering, we've got over 100,000 people in this county, and we've got the word out as much as we could, we would like to get more feedback on that, because this is one way we archive people talking in real time about this experience. I also put a call out with the County Department of Health, and they are attempting to save materials that are related to this pandemic, things that might have been used in the hospitals, for example. And Carol Harrison, who's the Director of Health and Human Services, told me that they are saving stuff for us. I don't know exactly what they're saving exactly, but I gave her a list of things that I'm looking for, whether it's COVID-19 bottles that were used and other equipment and PPE and things like that. So we're trying to collect information as much as we can.
And then maybe 100 years from now, if you guys turn in your story, somebody will make a story about you.
Mm-hmm.
I hope we don't pass on because of.
Yeah, let's make some stories about those who survived.
Right.
So are there any other comments or questions for anybody here?
What's Bill's next project?
He has to make me a Mount St. Helens video.
Yes. But Danielle did most of the preliminary legwork on that one, so it should be a lot quicker and easier.
Hopefully, because it's due in a week.
Yes.
So we're partnering with other agencies, like I don't know if we'd say it's a sort of a loose partnership, where we're going to submit a short film to Mount St. Helens Institute, who's collecting short films from State Parks is going to do one. Some other agencies are going to do them, and they're going to release one a day on all their social media. And then I believe they're going to share all of these other videos with us, and we're just going to kind of spread the word about how Mount St. Helens impacted us all in different ways. So and we'll share ours on our social media too as well, because the big anniversary, the 41st anniversary of the blast, will be in about 12 days, or in 12 days.
It's a very small handful of videos, but hopefully ours will be fun like this.
Yeah. So if there's no other questions or comments, I think we will probably see you at our final first Thursday for the season, which will close on June 3rd. And then we take a break during the summer. And then what we're really hoping and crossing our fingers for is that when First Thursdays start up again in September, that things will be cool enough and mellow enough and safe enough that we could maybe have on-site programming. And I'm thinking we might still need to film it or do something, because some people might still want to prefer to reach us remotely. We'll sort that out over the summer, but that's it. We got. Oh yes.
Sorry, just really fast. I just noticed that Sandy asked, still wondering if AW was born in 1833. How did he get into the Civil War? How old would he have been when he got into the Civil War?
Under 30. If he was there, he would be 28 when it started.
Yeah. So, and you can unmute yourself if you have a mic. I don't know if you have a mic.
Yeah, you would have been 8 years old. It started in 1841.
1861.
61. Yeah. Bingo. On with the program. Okay, never mind. Go back to school. Okay, I'm here. I'll unmute again.
Okay.
And now we can bid everyone a very fine and lovely good evening.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. We had at one point, I think, 27 participants. Yeah. So this is great. I really am encouraged to see this turnout, and please come by and see our final first Thursday for the season next month on the 3rd of June, and have a good night. Stay safe, everybody. And Bill, congrats. Yeah. Good job, Bill.
Bill.
Bill.